The framing of this statement about Dustin Hoffman relies on a common click-driven storytelling style that takes a real public figure and attaches emotionally charged language such as beyond sad or hard to watch. But when examined closely, it is important to separate sensational phrasing from verified reality, because there is no factual basis in such wording to describe his actual life circumstances. And instead, what it usually reflects is a broader internet trend of dramatizing aging. Celebrities as a way to provoke emotional reaction rather than provide accurate insight. And in this interpretive and corrective narrative, the focus shifts away from imagined decline and toward a more grounded understanding of how long careers in film and entertainment are actually lived, experienced, and perceived over time. Dustin Hoffman's career spans decades of influential performances, ranging from breakthrough roles that helped define modern American cinema to later stage appearances that reflect a veteran actor working within a changing industry, and like many performers of his generation, his public image is shaped not only by his body of work but also by the cultural memory of his most iconic roles, which often become more fixed in audience perception than the ongoing, everyday reality of his life, creating a gap between how audiences imagine a celebrity's present and what that present actually consists of. In many cases, this gap is where misleading narratives form. Because the public tends to associate aging with absence, and absence with decline, even when the individual continues to live a private, active, and personally meaningful life outside of constant media visibility, and this pattern is especially strong for actors whose peak fame occurred decades earlier, since their most recognizable work becomes a reference point that overshadows later stages simply due to changes in media attention rather than any real measure of personal circumstance. In reality, the lives of long-career actors are typically characterized by variation rather than collapse, involving periods of selective work, occasional public appearances, personal time away from the industry, and continued engagement with creative or family life, none of which can be accurately reduced to emotionally loaded labels such as sad or tragic without specific evidence, and doing so risks turning a complex human life into a simplified narrative designed more for engagement than understanding. From a broader cultural perspective, this type of framing also reflects how society often struggles with the concept of aging in public figures, especially those who were once associated with cultural peaks, because there is an expectation that visibility should remain constant across decades, and when it naturally decreases or changes form, it is sometimes misinterpreted as loss rather than evolution, even though stepping back from constant public exposure is a normal and often intentional part of long careers in entertainment. In this sense, the more accurate way to understand a figure like Dustin Hoffman at an advanced stage of life is not through assumptions of hardship, but through the lens of longevity, legacy, and selective participation in an industry that itself has changed dramatically since his earliest work, shifting from studio-dominated systems to globalized streaming ecosystems where the meaning of fame, availability, and creative output has transformed. Significantly, ultimately, the emotional framing of Beyond Sad tells us more about the internet's tendency to dramatize aging than it does about the individual being described, and a more responsible reading recognizes that public figures are still private individuals whose later years are not defined by spectacle but by ordinary human continuity, relationships, personal choices, reflection, and time away from constant scrutiny, and while audiences may continue to associate them with earlier eras of visibility, that does not mean their present lives conform to simplified narratives of decline, but rather that they continue to exist beyond the limits of what public storytelling often chooses to highlight.